everyone. I think we'll just go ahead and get started. I see we have about 54 participants in the room right now. I'm including district personnel. My name is Esther McBain, and I'm a regional superintendent here at Portland Public Schools. I want to seize this opportunity to welcome our guests, members of our Southeast Guiding Coalition team, to the scenario workshop. It is the fifth in a series of meetings that we are holding to try to correct or make some adjustments to our boundaries and to also improve the enrollment and program balancing options that we currently have. On behalf of the superintendent and leadership of Portland Public Schools, I welcome you, our Phase 1 members, to the fifth in a series of our meetings. I want to thank Flow Analytics, specifically Kent and my co-facilitator, Jed, for their marvelous support and collaborative guidance. The task for Phase 1 is, of course, to recommend an attendance area for Kellogg Middle School, which is scheduled to open in the fall of 2021. We're also looking at converting Harrison Park from a K-8 to a middle school. The goal is to have a recommendation to the Deputy Superintendent by December 17th. If you're here tonight, you are a member of the committee that's participating in the Phase 1 decision-making process. We, however, heard from our meeting last week that the process felt rushed and that people would really like to spend more time looking at the scenarios. So in response to that, we have added one more session right before our open house. Additionally, during our breakout sessions this evening, you will have the opportunity to review new scenarios created from the input we received from you last week. Thank you again for your questions. Please keep them coming. I'd like to pivot a little bit to just remind us quickly of where we've been. In our first meeting, we discussed the scope and purpose of the work. We looked at our charge, and we looked at the multi-phase planning process in an effort to provide recommendations with the intention of improving enrollment and program balancing options for our schools. Additionally, the coalition decided to identify, refine, and propose revisions to attendance area boundaries, school grade configurations, focus program options. We will strive to support our racial equity and social justice initiatives. We'll look at our balanced enrollment and optimized facility use in our programs. The guiding principles which serve as our anchors are that the coalition will have students at the center of their decision making, that we will continue to observe the racial equity and social justice lens. We will strive for excellence, we will maintain respect, and we'll retain and build our relationships. We welcome your creativity and innovation, a lot of which we saw last week. We value our partnerships and our collaboration, and we truly want to ground this work in the spirit of Portland and enjoy the process. At our second meeting, Danny provided information about equity and social justice and shared a number of maps with us. Our third meeting, we looked at the springboard proposal and we took that apart and created all kinds of scenarios. Last week, we looked and discussed these scenarios, and out of that emerged other suggestions and recommendations. Tonight, we'll spend the bulk of the time looking at more scenarios, and then we'll take your feedback and we'll figure how we move forward from there depending on the results that we get tonight. Slide 2. So our meeting objectives tonight is to review and affirm the Southeast Guiding Coalition process for enrollment and program balance and recommendations for the board. We will also review and refine community engagement processes. We'll discuss emerging themes in a large group. We will review scenarios and incorporate feedback from prior meetings. And then we'll narrow and refine the scenarios that we currently have. So last week we looked at 5, and today we're going to look at a few more. Our agenda for tonight is, of course, we're going to look at our group agreements. We're going to talk a lot about decentering whiteness. We'll look at the updates to our process. At 6:30, the community engagement process update will be led by the district, and we'll have discussions around that. At 6:45, we'll start our large group discussion and look for emerging themes and complexities. We'll also address multiple strategies and acknowledge solutions that we can work with. Presentation of refined scenarios based on last week's meetings will occur at 7:15. And at 7:30, we'll go into our breakout sessions. I believe the breakout sessions are for 30 minutes. We'll adjourn at 8:30. That said, I do want to invite Danny Ledesma, our Director, Racial Equity and Social Justice, Portland Public Schools, to share the group agreements.
Thank you, Esther, and hello, everyone. It's nice to see everyone. I don't know about you, but I've thought about you quite a bit since the last time that we've met. And I found that as I've read the emails that have been going around and just been ruminating on a lot of the conversations that we've been having, I found that a lot of the conversation, a lot of the questions show up not only in our balance sort of enrollment process, but have showed up in quite a bit of the work that we're doing at the district. And so I just want to thank everyone for your engagement and for really just bringing all of your perspective and experience and expertise to this. I've found that in a lot of meetings, not necessarily even related to this, different members, we've been thinking a lot about it and sort of trying to think about how we as a district can really strengthen our relationship with our parents, with our students, with each other. So at the top of tonight, I wanted to spend some time with us talking about a couple of things. And as we go through a gigantic process like this that has so many implications for student learning, for families, and for the way that we interact with each other, and the way that we go about our trying to achieve our vision at PPS, I do want to come back to these group agreements. And I'm sure, like many of you, this is incredibly excruciating times. I find that my resolve to live into my values, to try to improve every day, has really been tested. And one of the things that does bring me comfort is sort of thinking about how we're trying to norm these group agreements throughout our work at PPS. And these are really important because they really challenge us to be to try to interact and think about ways that we can kind of come together and find our interests and our values converging. We think about these group agreements, staying engaged, speak your truth responsibly, really listening to believe one another and to understand our perspectives, be willing to do things differently and experience discomfort, and then to expect and accept non-closure. These are all really, really difficult things on a day when you're well-fed, had lots of sleep, and not a lot to worry about. They become even more challenging to live into and to lead into and to stay in agreement with all the challenges that we're facing. Yet, I think that as a collective, as a community, we've really have seen great examples of folks really staying engaged. This is a long and arduous process. This is a process with not a lot of closure, with multiple opportunities for different approaches. And as a result, there is quite a bit of discomfort and sort of trying on different perspectives and experiences. And so I just wanted to acknowledge and thank you for sort of staying in agreement with one another and with us. And also want to ask folks to kind of to hold space for when we feel that we're out of agreement, or for when there's ways that we're not sort of modeling these agreements as PPS staff. And so I wanted to go to the next slide and talk a little bit about some of the feedback that we got. And I was, I had this moment of being really thrilled because Martha and Sheila at the end of the meeting talked about some work that we're doing at the district around how do we we really decenter whiteness? And I wanted to just frame this up for us and give folks an opportunity to sort of think deeply and to reflect on this and think about how our process is either decentering whiteness or maybe not decentering whiteness, and sort of how we can give feedback to improve. So I'm going to frame this up for folks, and then Kent and Esther are going to talk a little bit about our processes and sort of like what this means for our work together. So there is a very brilliant scholar, Tema Okun, who has, as part of Dismantling Racism Works, and if you click on the link in the slide, there's basically a tenets of what is white supremacist culture. And at PPS, we've been trying to, what we recognize, and I don't know if you'll remember back from my presentation about the ways that we're approaching racial equity, is to attend to culture, and to really think about how we set the conditions so that we can have a changed culture, a culture that decenters whiteness, but that also really that sort of sets the conditions for transformation, so that we're leading into our theory of action. And so what Tema Okun does in this link is lays out characteristics of white supremacy culture that show up in organizations, that show up in groups. And one of the things that Tema Okun talks about is that this culture is powerful because it's sort of at the belief level. It's the sort of below the iceberg that really sort of can be damaging, because these tenets of culture are presented and can often be accepted as the standard or the norm. And so one of the things I'd like us to think about, one of the things that we've talked about at PPS and looking at these, is how are there places where as people of color, as staff of color, as white staff, as white people, as white folks, where do these characters show up, and where are they presented as the norm or as the standard? And how do we look critically at them being presented as the standard, and how do we sort of unpack and pull apart so that we're recognizing that there's multiple ways. There's ways that we can provide antidotes to building a culture where this isn't necessarily the norm, but it is, and it's certainly not looked at as the standard. And so these 13 characteristics in these slides, what we've done is we've tried to look at the characteristics on the left-hand side, characteristics such as a sense of urgency, defensiveness, quality over quantity, quantity over quality, only one right way, either or thinking, power hoarding, a fear of open conflict, individualism, and so forth, a right to comfort, and really try to think about how in our process to be able to reach our objectives in this process, what are ways that we're actively trying to decenter this? And so I want to really just thank Martha and Sheila for opening the door so that we could kind of have this conversation, and also have some dialogue about where either through the process or through the conversation, we're either hitting the mark on trying to renorm, or where we need to dig a little bit deeper. So in each of we can go to the next slide, we have sort of samples of where we're trying to renorm, and then some of the continue to go through all of the characteristics. So Kent and Esther are going to go through our process and are going to sort of speak more definitively to some of the ways that we're trying to decenter. And then I want to invite everyone to continue, and you can go to the next slide, I want to invite everyone to continue to think about how these characteristics are either being challenged or where we need to sort of come back and sort of boost some more ways that we can renorm or challenge this at the center. After we hear a little bit more about the process, visiting a little bit more of where we've been and where we hope to go, and then also to think about ways that we're also engaging our community efforts. So we'll come back to a larger conversation about this. But for now, I guess one of the things I wanted to open up to the group is to see if there's any questions about the Tema Akun and the characteristics and sort of ways that we're doing this, or just some reactions or thoughts about that.
I think it is clear that you're starting to do the work, but I find it problematic that this was looked at with only the administration and there was no input of those within the community. I as well think that um, PPS has done this wrong, and the history shows that in the past, and it has center whiteness in decision making, and it almost feels like an apology needs to be sent out to the community. And even just in this process, knowing that is English only, uh, you have to have access to the internet. We're talking about affecting communities that are DLI programs that are mainly non, or most of them might not be English dominant speaking. We're leaving some very serious stakeholders without their input. So this process itself is centered in white supremacy, as only a few have access to be able to give their voice and their input for decisions that would affect a whole collective group that have been historically marginalized or other. Um, there, the group agreements, I find them great, the right to comfort, but uh, I did not agree to all of them. I didn't sign a document saying I do not agree to all the group agreements themselves. I think as a woman of color, as a minority, as an immigrant, I have the right to be defensive at times as well. When my family and others that I see in the education system have been wrong, and my job as an educator as well is to fight for them, and I take that very seriously. I'm in this as a parent, but I'm also an educator. And when their voices are not heard, the fact that there's no teachers being heard in this is very problematic. Very problematic.
Well, and so Martha, I want to thank you again for bringing that up and for being that voice that is challenging us, because I think that's the way that a system like ours continues to get better. And so I want to kind of encourage you to continue to be that critical voice for us, because it's without that voice that we don't get better. And I think one of the things that I've been really trying to reflect upon, this morning we heard Dr. Ibram Kendi give a speech, and one of the things that he talked about in terms of the work that we're doing is that, and as a reminder that at any given moment, sort of being labeled a racist or an anti-racist, these are labels that aren't necessarily tattoos, but they're really sort of like peel and stick labels. And I think that that's one of the things that we're really trying to sort of promote in terms of this process and the development of the process, and also in the work that we're doing at PPS, is to acknowledge when we are acknowledge when we're not, when we're being too passive around the work that we need to do to disrupt racism, and also to continue to strive and to sort of recognize that being in the work is not something that's going to, it's not a short thing, it's something that is like ongoing and part of our work every day. So I really appreciate that. And I would say that this is open for discussion. You know, I think that we wanted to kind of bring this into the space and continue to have the dialogue with you and other folks in the group. So I just want to continue to really honor and respect that you're making this space and sort of holding our feet to the fire, if you will, around this. I think it's really important.
Thank you for that. And
excuse me just for a moment. I want to make sure, because the community cannot see our chat, that we've had 4 or 5 teachers identify themselves in the process. So I just didn't want the community to miss that when they're watching the video. So please go ahead.
Hey Claire, this is Amy from Sunnyside. I don't want to take up too much airtime, but I do want to say for like public record that there were 3 parents of color and 2 teachers of color at Sunnyside who were willing to be on the committee, and today they all pulled themselves off of the committee, citing some of the things that were just shared. And I think one of the things that I'm wondering about is like just the clarity, just being a principal and getting the communication. It's helpful to know that like the opening of Kellogg is fixed, and with the opening of a school at a certain time comes staffing timelines that are also fixed, and that even if we try to center race and justice, there is a process of like speed, capitalism, politics that are inherently involved in this process. And just being like transparent and clear about that. I didn't understand that until I attended the 2 meetings. And that could be just me being inundated with stuff to read. But I think that I just wanted that inherently sets a context that has some of the tenets of white supremacy that is fixed. And I hear that that's a fixed timeline for this group. And, but it is, I think, one of the reasons why the representatives from my school decided to leave. I felt like that fixed part of it was so fixed that that it wasn't really worth their time to share. I'm not going to speak for them, but that's as much as I will say. So I just wanted to share that I'm the only person here from Sunnyside tonight. This information came to me like a couple hours ago.
Okay, thank you. Are there other folks who'd like to sort of respond?
Yeah, I'd like to say it has become clear that the message in the beginning of trying to maintain equity and see what we can do to help, make things even has actually boiled down to a building utilization question, which has nothing to do with race except for where we're talking about putting all of our language speakers together. Otherwise, it really looks like, it's pretty transparent that we want to make sure that the buildings are occupied in the right levels, more than we want to make sure that there's actual equity being addressed. And that's something that I'm definitely not a minority in any way, shape, or form. And it was pretty clear. So, as a parent, I'm disappointed. I came in with totally different thoughts than I have right now. And I'll be interested to see what our new proposals are and how we do going forward.
Thank you.
As a teacher, I would like to say I want to thank all the other teachers that are in the room. You all, I don't know how you're doing it, and you're being here after teaching online all day long. And I just appreciate and want to value your humanity and see you as necessary in this process. As well, I want to point out that we don't have a lot of teachers that are from the DLI programs. Okay, and that is due to the fact that PPS has a problem with retention of teachers of color and teachers that are non-English dominant language. And those are the ones that are going to be clearly affected by these boundaries and change the lines and the DLI programs, and their voice is not clearly found or put within this conversation, and that needs to be centered.
Thank you. Other folks?
I have something that I'm interested in sharing. So I was in the group with Martha last week, and honestly, I'm not hearing a lot of response to the issues or resolution to the issues that are raised. It's only my second meeting, so I know I have a lot to learn from everybody, but I also know that I don't feel like I have the information. I spent hours on the map today, and I'm looking at these communities that are outlying in the southeast boundary. Generally, they seem to be communities where people of color are represented. Generally, they seem to be communities that are economically at a disadvantage to a lot of the other communities in the school district. And no matter how I move that map, those communities were going to suffer, no matter what you do, unless you talk about busing or moving people into different places. And I don't even know what the goal is for that. I don't know if our goal, I don't know what those communities want. I would love to know what those outlying communities that are the most disadvantaged want. And I don't think we have that information yet. We're trying to answer questions and we're moving the map around, and I'd like to, I don't think we have the right goals, to be honest with you. As a parent, I don't see students represented as a goal and their interests. I see how do we fill buildings, and I see how we fill buildings based on a process that doesn't take neighborhoods into consideration and current neighborhood boundaries, doesn't take communities into consideration. I see a bunch of people here that, God bless you all for being here and being willing to participate. But I'm curious if other people feel like they have the means and the tools to actually make decisions for other neighborhoods than they reside in. And that we're getting the information from people who are underrepresented to make those decisions.
So thank you for that. And I think so. I think what we're attempting to do here tonight is to do some recalibration. I think that we've heard from several folks about sort of wanting more information, wanting different data, and sort of kind of calling into question sort of how the process can be adjusted, knowing that there might be some things that are immovable and some things that are, and sort of how do we sort of move into that. And so I think what we wanted to do at this moment is to kind of maybe turn it over to Esther and to Kent to talk more about the process and some of the thinking that we've been trying to do to be able to be more responsive to what we're hearing. But I do want to continue to, I think what I guess I hope that folks know that of high interest to everyone, to myself, is how we move through this process, sort of leaning into our values around racial equity and how we are really trying to center around these things. And so when folks bring up where there's dissonance or where we can do better, that's where I think the transformation happens. And that's certainly the spirit in which I'm hearing a lot of the sort of call for changing and to sort of continuing to do the adjustment. And I think it is that disruptive spirit that helps us move through this. I think acknowledging that, we are trying to do this, trying to do this differently. And we are, at least on the PPS side, signed up for experiencing the discomfort in doing something differently. And so I just want to encourage folks to continue to continue to sort of to provide that feedback. The clarity of feedback has been really helpful. And I think that what we're trying to do is facilitate the continued conversation and try to figure out where we have the most interests converging, and want to continue to invite people from all of the perspectives to continue to sort of hang in there and grapple with the complexity as you have been doing. And so I'm going to turn it over to Kent and to Esther to do a little bit more of that reflecting as we talk about the process and our community engagement.
So thank you all very much. I do want to acknowledge all that you have said. I really appreciate you sharing your concerns and your insights from various perspectives. I also do want to just gently remind everyone that this process is anchored in two phases. Phase one is actually driven by a need to find boundaries for Kellogg Middle School and also to maybe turn Harrison Park from a K-8 to a K-5. So that's what we're looking at this time. In order for us to have the staffing in place and to be able to open Kellogg Middle School in the fall as planned, we do have to make some decisions at this time moving forward. The decisions we'll make will impact, of course, the different schools that are around because Kellogg Middle School is a middle school. So there is sort of a gentle sense of urgency because of the timelines that we're bound to, just like Amy said earlier. For example, for PPS, staffing does occur in February. If we make decisions right now, we're still in a good place in terms of determining how the staffing will go for Kellogg Middle School. The other part of it too is that there are also decisions that have to be made within certain timelines in order for that school to be prepared to receive our students in the fall. So yes, in a way, there's a sense of urgency around what we're doing. It is just a little bit it is a little bit compromised just because of the constraints that we face. In terms of being defensive, I don't necessarily see that we are defensive. I think that there are positions that need to be addressed and things that need to be responded to. Depending on what it is, I can see how people can perceive it as being defensive, but most of that is truly anchored in the reality of what we're dealing with. And sometimes that doesn't necessarily come forth like we expect it to. Our goal is to continue to at least share what we know and hopefully hear from the community, because in hearing from the community, that helps push our thinking, and it also gives a different lens that we may have omitted by default. We definitely want quality over quantity. We solicit input from our community members, and yes, I do understand we probably don't have all the right people at the table, but we are hoping that our communities have smaller groups and that they have spokespeople who will bubble up what concerns and discussions they have to the rest of us up here so that we can at least take their thoughts and their guidances into consideration. Yes, it is true. We don't necessarily have everybody who could attend either because they were not invited or because they were invited and there were other things that came up. But our goal is truly to hear from our community members. So if there's any way our schools can reach out to their subgroups or their affinity groups and get that information to us, that would be great. Kent, do you have anything to add?
I think the one thing I might add, Esther, would be that we've definitely heard the last meeting and also tonight that input is valued, and access to input is something that collectively Flow and PPS need to work toward to ensure that people of color have access to provide input. And so we do have some information tonight around that input gathering processes that are in place currently, and that we will also look to do as we move out to the open house in a couple of weeks. And so I don't know if we want to move towards that and kind of discuss that piece. I know Shanice has some information for us on that.
I apologize for interrupting, but I know we're on a timeline, and a couple of things that have come to mind as we move through this process is hopefully we learn from this process to make it better for the next time. And one thing I'm wondering, we knew that Kellogg was going to be built, and I understand that these meetings were postponed from the spring, but why weren't we having these conversations earlier when we knew that this was going to come up, and so we weren't on such a tight timeline? And then my other thought is, I think it is important that we're, as principals, pulling comments and understanding the needs of our community, but I also think that there maybe should be a budget tied to this so that principals can pay for interpreters to hear voices, because it comes out of school budgets, which is fine, But I also think if we really believe in hearing other voices, we should have a budget that supports that. And so these are all things like moving forward, hopefully we can learn from and change or make better, I guess.
Thank you, Misha. I'm sure we have a note gatherer somewhere and we will take that into consideration. You are correct about the budget. I think that it would be good for schools to be able to compensate their participants. The other piece of it is we're really trying not to look at just one right way of doing anything. That's the purpose of our breakout groups. Last week, I know that in our breakout groups, we shared 5 scenarios, but some of those scenarios were not accepted wholesomely like they were presented. They were taken apart and merged with others. And we actually came up with some other scenarios that were shared. So it's never our intent to have an only one way to do anything. We look at multiple perspectives, then we consider the variables that impact our decision making, and we try to make the best decision in the interests of our schools, our students especially, and our communities. Kent, you have, would you like to add anything to that?
Well, I think certainly in the processes that we work on, this idea of either or thinking is certainly something that we need to work to try to get beyond, because a lot of times it's we can do this and we can do something else. And so usually the solutions that come out of the committee work and the work group work is really built upon each other. And we've talked about that iterative process. And so when we have proposals, and like tonight we have a few more proposals to look at, really those proposals are there so that we can critique them, so that the work groups can come up with even better adjustments to those to try to help meet the outcome goals for this committee. And so I would say that's certainly something that we're committed to in this process, is to really get away from that either or thinking. Moving towards really looking at what can be the best solution moving forward.
I also want us to note that in this whole process, we have people, community members, continually asking questions and emailing all through the week based on what they heard, what they know, and so on. So we truly are trying to reach the grassroots and to reach the people that are stakeholders in this process as much as possible. And yes, when you have a complex process like this, it is rare that all of us, all 100, 200, however many of us, will agree to all the same things. So what we're looking for is what's reasonable for everybody. What can people live with, knowing that I may not get everything I want, but I get what I can live with or what I can abide by. And maybe other opportunities will arise that will allow me to get closer to the goal that I have set in my mind. So that is our goal as a district. It isn't a right to comfort. It also isn't a worship of the written word by any means. It is a dialogue. And through that dialogue, we're hoping that we emerge with other decisions that would even be better than the original thinking. We have to start somewhere, and that's our goal. So thank you again for continuing to help shape our thinking. Thank you for, again, broadening the lens around what we omitted, did not notice, or just downplayed for whatever reason. We will take all your input, and we will do as much as we can to at least honor your concerns in a way that makes it a very equitable process for all.
I would say here as we close up, thank you for that. I would make sure when next time this comes up, the marketing effort should be different.
Okay.
It shouldn't be pitched as an equity piece. Okay. When we're only looking at one small part of Southeast Portland, we can't address equity across Portland as a whole and some of the other schools that are lacking. We're not even looking at all of Southeast as a whole. So really, I think had I come into this knowing we are trying to find the right utilization numbers for these schools to fit this new middle school, that's a different approach than we were trying to, balance equity. I mean, like the scope was so large in the beginning that it's way off from where we are, which I think, is probably disappointing to other parents aside from myself. But next time around, maybe the marketing.
Thank you very much, Mr. Josh. We appreciate it. So again, like I said, we don't necessarily have a final goal in mind. We're hoping that we arrive at these decisions working collaboratively with our community members and our parents. And that said, I will pass the conversation on to Shanice.
Thank you, Kent and Esther. And just want to also express or acknowledge being grateful for y'all bringing expertise into this space and thinking about how we can refine our steps moving forward and think about the perspectives and suggestions that will really help address our issues and the gaps that we might have both moving forward and receiving input from our community. And so we're going to talk a little bit about what we have moving forward. I also want to say too that it says a lot about this group that the perspectives of communities, especially folks, students, and people speaking multiple languages and people of color having voice and access in this process. And PPS is absolutely, I think, aligning with this thinking and wanting to have multiple means to reach folks, especially our Black and Indigenous and folks of color and folks in our DLI programs and multilingual communities. And so we'll be able to talk a little bit about that, and already heard some suggestions, interpreters, and those are some things that we have set in store, but want to hear more feedback, especially from you all on other things that will help supplement the ways we can learn from others. The timeline that we're currently looking at is an overview of the schedule of this group. And I know we have some scenarios to continue to refine and bringing them to various spaces like our virtual open house coming up. And so in December, we have a significant, I think, milestone for this group coming up, but is working really in tandem with these multiple means of reaching students and families. And so we want to talk a little bit about that and hear also other places to have space to shape this process and its decision making with more folks than we're reaching right now. So if we could forward to the next slide, I think we'll begin to see a comparison. And so on the green left-hand side, you'll see some of the outreach efforts that are happening at the same time that the Guiding Coalition is diving in to this work. And so I know in October, we're just reaching the end, but having a really being in depth with an online survey and preparation for an open house, as well as phone surveys that are happening where there are more touch points that are happening with communities of color on our phone surveys. And so we look forward to being able to bring that feedback and learnings from those different spaces to this group to help us make meaning of what families, especially these families that we want to prioritize in the process, are thinking. And we'll have a space to refine a potential proposal and revisit that process again in November and continue reaching families. I know there will be various opportunities in addition to focus groups that will take place in November. And so wanting to dedicate spaces for students, teachers, folks speaking multiple languages, and Black and Indigenous folk populations. And so we're looking forward to trying to think about other strategies that might be able to reinforce some of the outcomes we're hoping to reach together. And in December, really continuing to build that awareness with another open house, and really weaving together these efforts that y'all are dedicating your time doing in relationship to all of the ways we possibly can reach families. I think we can move to the next slide, and we have a snapshot of what we've been hearing. I know at this point there's been a little under 200 phone conversations happening in the middle grades, so almost through those. But a little glance at the people who we've been able to reach in these schools in the middle grades, and on the bottom there's a glance of neighborhood and DLI. In terms of the families we've been able to communicate with on the survey. And so this is one kind of method we've been reaching folks. I mentioned earlier that the phone discussions are feeling more meaningful in reaching our folks or more diverse communities. And so the strategies that y'all come up with, especially interpretation at those opportunities that we had talked about in the previous slide, are definitely the kinds of things we want to be able to explore. And so a full kind of update and glance at what we learned from the survey will be coming. But if we move to the next slide, I believe there's a glance at our online survey kind of responses. And so we are able to kind of differentiate how the demographics of our respondents might show up differently with online means versus phone means. And we can, I think, move to the next slide where there's actual comments about things that we can share and or remember as we think about the themes that you have surfaced in the process. So I think from left to right, you kind of put two quotes that are capturing some snapshots of what we're hearing from families. And so there is various perspectives wanting to maintain community cohesion and less disruption to school school transportation. And so those issues have been coming up from y'all as well. And also a value for what it might look like to have dedicated K-5 and 6-8 program opportunities. And so I think that is just a snapshot, and we'll be able to share more with you and also hear more about what else we can be doing. And I'll pause here, and I know that we'll have some time to actually dive deeper and really took really detailed notes on what was coming up for folks last week, and we want to be able to center some of those themes to move forward and make sure in an intentional way we're kind of responding to some of the issues we're surfacing tonight and through the process. So appreciate y'all for sticking through this with us and being in thought partnership as we create a meaningful solution for opening a school and a comprehensive middle school. I believe I'm passing it back over now, unless we have thoughts that you're feeling in this moment. We're catching the chat and want to be able to address and expand on the things that we've shared. And ultimately, if you have an idea at another point, we can get into it then as well.
So Shanice, if I could just ask a couple of questions right now. First, thank you so much for giving us this overview. I really appreciate taking the time and offering a bit more clarity about, what this outreach process has been, because I think it's so important to this work. And I think moving forward with other parts of Portland, it would be great if this was all fronted. So if the coalition really received all of this information before, so we could really understand what role we were playing in this whole process, what the expectations were from the district on us, as coalition members. I think that honestly, we're a resource that probably could have been used or could be used much more strategically moving forward. So just encouraging that. I think a few of the questions, we may not have time to answer it tonight, but I'd love to see a list of the questions that have been asked, just so that I kind of have a sense for how those are, how they're framed. And also then we could even utilize some of those same questions and conversations we're having with colleagues and other families and other members of our school communities to be able to kind of gather, in a sense, similar qualitative data. Another piece that I'm really curious about is that I know within many members of our community, I'm speaking as a Latina, having somebody just call me myself is one thing, but being able to get together with other community members and have that conversation, even if that's virtual. So rather than just like an individual person, I might not feel comfortable responding, especially not responding on behalf of my whole community and my community's needs. But if there was a way for my community to come together, I'm going to be a lot more able to offer recommendations on behalf of my broader community. So, and that brings me to my last point. I'm sorry, I'm going quickly, but that's for me, when we're looking at impacts, we're looking at racial equity impacts of students here. I'm looking at our students who are emerging English speakers who are currently enrolled in some of our DLI programs, definitely those who are not enrolled in DLI as well, but I feel like we have an opportunity to look at students who are in those DLI programs. And I want to know, has the district's approach been sort of broad across the whole district? Or has there been a targeted focus on saying, we know that these are the schools, these are the programs, these are the families that will be most impacted by these changes. So that's where we are going to invest more of our time, more of our resources. So I'm just curious if the district has kind of taken that targeted universalism approach where you really focus all of that effort as much as you can on those that will be most impacted, knowing that that then benefits the whole. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Sheila. I think we now pass the presentation back on to Danny. Shanice, were you going to respond?
I can follow up in the chat.
Okay, thank you.
If I can just add a few comments here. I feel like our feedback's going to a black hole. I know it's in the email and we send a survey, but the scenarios keep going on. I don't feel like my feedback is taken into consideration at all. And I don't have an explanation of that. So I'm really having a hard time to move on with this because I don't agree with that to begin with. And I voiced my concerns, and I'm a Chinese parent, and I talked to a lot of Chinese families in Woodstock, and they were so worried, upset about the change to the Chinese program there because it's working so well and it's balanced. And I get it. There is one single strand in Harrison Park to be solved. And are there other ways to solve that instead of moving 500 or some people, through elementary school, middle school, high school, and then to solve 80 people program? I'm not saying that we should just play the numbers game, but there is a lot of families are impacted. And also in terms of the the transportation hardship. I don't know if it's purposely overlooked or it is just overlooked. And there are another cluster, which I am live in. So I live between closer to Whitman, and that would be a hardship for me for my son to go to Madison. So it's 5.5 miles, distance. And for Harrison Park, let's say if we cannot find other solutions, if they wanted to join, and it's 3.9 miles for them to Cleveland. So I don't really understand the rationale behind it. So, and I really expect, and there are other questions in the email that, we want to understand why the decisions made this way, because there's no explanation. So we chat, we send an email out, but I don't feel like it's being taken into consideration.
Kai, thank you.
That's a common thread from there are a lot of different ideas, not some in conflict with each other in that email discussion, but I feel like a common thread I heard, I certainly feel from a lot of folks, is it'd be really helpful to hear perspective from the district on just where, your perspective on these scenarios right now, what you see as the pros and cons, what are sort of I know nothing's decided yet, but sort of where there are things that are very likely to be part of the outcome, just what's the explanation for that? That would be really helpful for me, and I think for others.
Great. Well, so so Min and Andy, thank you for your comments. And Min, I hear that you're saying that it feels like your emails are going into a black hole, and I want you to know I've thought very deeply about a lot of your emails, and I think some of the difficulty is the complexity. I wish that there were a straight line answer from A to B, but as we're discussing and as we hear feedback from both the community engagement processes and also some of the discussion that's happened in these meetings and in the email threads, one of the things that we wanted to kind of bring forth to folks is to show you kind of where we're seeing some of the sort of tensions around three themes. And we hope that we can kind of have this conversation or have some group reflection around these themes to then go into those scenarios and try to find where we can identify, are there some straight lines? And I think to Andy's point, I appreciate you wanting to know some of what the district is thinking. And I think, I guess I would say I don't know that there's a single perspective even within the district, right? So in conversations with the principals in these things, there are so many complexities, and so I think one of the sort of challenges in doing a big group process like that is that we're trying to be as open about what the constraints are and also try to surface where those tensions are coming up and then really kind of turn that back to you all to sort of continue to get this information. And so I think one of the things that we're trying to demonstrate is hearing this feedback. How do we sort of analyze this in a way and then sort of send that back to you all for continued reflection so that we can continue to kind of push towards trying to find that interest convergence where we've really surfaced all of the issues. And so I think one of the challenges is that we are in this messy middle where we're finding all the tension places, we're finding all the complexities, and we're just on the precipice of trying to find what can we coalesce around. And I think the other thing that we're hearing and that we want to do is how can we continue to provide more information that is that's relevant to some of the requests that you've made. So I'm going to take us through 3 slides and then ask us to have a little bit of discussion before we go into some more trying to refine those scenarios. And so hopefully, Min, you will start to see kind of like where some of your either direct words or perspectives are being represented in the ways that we've kind of categorized these challenges. So these theme, and I use the term theme loosely because these themes are really surfacing where there are some tension. And so this first theme, and we've heard this in the discussion tonight and discussion before, is really thinking about and really thinking critically and deeply about how decisions all throughout the process and all throughout the different pieces of the process, how that is going to have an impact on racial equity and social justice. And I think attention has been that there are a lot of perspectives around, is what we propose going to be limiting? Is it going to truly, going back to our lens exercise, is it really going to expand opportunity, or is it going to reinforce barriers? And so if you look at each of these like word clouds, hopefully you'll see some of your things. A lot has sort of come into this interplay around how do race and poverty and neighborhood characteristics and what's been happening in Portland around gentrification play out in a lot of these decisions. I think one of the most complex issues that folks are trying to contend with is sort of speaks to the comment in the green. I think that early on we were looking at data and trying to find where are Native speakers living and how do we create closer access to DLI programming so that Native speakers don't have to travel very far. But one of the tension places then is that, oops, there's a fire alarm going on where I'm at. This is bizarre. One of the places, I'm gonna just mute and nope, it's done. I'm so sorry about that. So one of the tension places is that inadvertently sort of reinforces the gentrification and the displacement that has occurred by pushing those by having those programs on the outskirt where many Native speakers and different communities of color have been displaced to. So so I think that if you look at these, if you kind of go back and think about some of the conversations, we wanted to just have a few of these, but we also have a longer document that we want to kind of share with folks eventually, where we're really trying to pull in each of these into these themes. So on the next tension area, if that isn't complicated enough, thinking about issues of poverty and how race intersects with poverty, how we're programming around dual language immersion and where it's located. If that's not complex enough, another theme that people are really wrestling with is the premise around equitable programming and the tension between focus option schools, neighborhood schools, and dual language immersion programs. I think this is another one where there isn't necessarily a straight answer. I think that you heard in some of the, and you saw in some of the community feedback is that students and families are very tied to their experience, and changes to those experiences are difficult and not without consequence. And so as we try to achieve equitable programming and to try to find that balance, it becomes extremely complex. So one more theme, and again, is thinking about building utilization and enrollment. And so Josh spoke to sort of like where he's gotten to, like, you know, this is analysis around sort of like building utilization. It is another tension point, right? Because as a district, we are constrained by physical spaces, right? And we want to try to optimize the usage of those spaces, but that's not without complexity. The demographics of students, it's important. We want to make sure that we're continuing to live into racial equity and social justice. We want to make sure that we're offering diverse experiences for folks. And we also want to make sure that there is balance, and there's certainly a lot of examples of how different boundary changes and different programmatic changes have a significant impact on demographic changes and that sort of utilization and enrollment. So as we think about those three themes and the ways that we've grouped them, I think that's where we're hearing a lot of the sort of crux of the complexity and the challenge of moving forward. In addition to what we've been hearing about sort of wanting to make sure that as the guiding coalition, as the district, as teachers, as principals, as students are sort of going to be impacted, wanting to make sure that we can be as expansive and making sure that we're really sort of centering the sort of voice of folks who are going to be impacted by this. And the truth of it is that even within demographic groups or even within different groups, there's quite a wide range of approaches that people are taking in this. So I think I want to take a moment to ask folks to kind of reflect and think about the way that we've tried to capture some of these themes / tensions, and maybe ask sort of folks' response around this. I imagine that we might have been too simplistic in the way that we've categorized. We might have been making it overly complicated. Folks might think of another tension point or another category, or you may want to retool it all together. But I just wanted to get a sense of folks' reactions to the way that we're hearing these themes, and to see if we're getting closer to what we're hearing.
Can I ask, weren't all of these stressors in place before ground was ever broken at Kellogg? Or the work is starting on Madison, like all of this stuff existed before, and all of the things we point out of, well, we can't fit all these kids in that way, and we can't do this program that way because they don't fit. We could have taken an opportunity and done more purpose building for these schools to be able to address a need in a community. The way it feels now, it's like a middle school popped out of nowhere and we're just trying to do our best to fit kids in, versus we had an opportunity to build, for a purpose. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I think that's it's a very astute observation. I think oftentimes I've worked in the public sector my whole career, and oftentimes community processes are sort of dealt with the results of a kick the can policy, or a sort of decision making that's just been delayed or avoided for a lot of times. And so I think there's probably, you can point to our community's response, say for example, our community's response to gentrification and displacement. We knew as a community about this since the early 90s. And we didn't make a lot of public policy changes to address this until the mid 2000s, and which is way too late. So I think you're sort of surfacing something that is that is acknowledging kind of where we are, and sort of as a group where we're contending with decision making.
And how do we then continue our process without feeling like we ended up kicking the can, right? Because somebody kicked the can on this middle school build, so we'll just kick the can on staffing. It's just, we can be an agent of change, or we can rubber stamp whatever you guys are coming up with. I really hope that the community is, being reached out to the way that we're talking about it, and not necessarily the way that's showing up in the proposals.
Yeah, well, and I want to be really careful that that kick the can policymaking is not anything that is an official thing. That is just my thing. But I think what excites me, and I think my colleagues at PPS, is that wanting the folks in this committee, wanting the folks that we're sort of talking to, our students or families, to feel as if they can be agents of change, and to try to identify, well, what are those key levers that as a collective we could agree on can make some change. And I think there is a fair amount of risk involved in any kind of process that, to get it right or to get it better it's a risk that we're hoping to take together and to move into. Did other folks have reactions or comments? Because I want to ask you some more questions, but I wanted to just give a little bit of space for folks to kind of react.
Well, I wanted to say that I think that something that sort of ties some of these tensions together is that that this process involves, I feel like there's two separate things going on with the program locations and boundaries and enrollment. And it's very complex, especially when it feels like we don't have all the information about how many students, how many strands, how many students from in or outside of the neighborhood area, like what it actually looks like to move a program, how many students from a program would actually follow that program if it were moved to a different location. There's a lot of complexity with that. And then being asked to look at that and boundaries at the same time feels like two separate things and way too many moving pieces to make reasonable suggestions about it. I feel like I feel like PPS in community with the DLI populations and needs to be making the decisions about where programs are located. And then we can talk about boundaries at a more layman's type of level, but we're being asked to do we don't have the information to make the decisions that we're being asked to make. And that includes that community feedback.
Yeah. And just to connect like another dot sort of, because Beth, you and others were talking about just sort of understanding the rationale for some of the scenarios. I feel like the question of whether or not, the question of consolidating the location of DLI programs at schools, you know, where we have the highest concentration of native speakers, I've heard in conversations over the last couple of weeks, very different viewpoints across the coalition of whether that should even be a goal. And I guess I'm just curious, like, what is at some point we would have to either get to consensus on that as a group, or the district would just have to decide, right? But unless we know whether or not that is a goal, it's hard to refine the scenario. So like, what's the process for answering that and sort of the other key questions that would go into even to our being able to actually provide good input into the scenarios? Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I would say that I'm not trying to be sort of flip in the response. I think that I think we're wanting thought partners, right, on this. I think that there's just like in this coalition, just like in PPS, there's quite a few sort of approaches and perspectives on how to move here. And I think that ultimately the reason why we sort of endeavored on this is to try to have thought partnership there. And so I think it's a good segue into my next question, is that we've been trying to collect all of the sort of requests for information and for data, and to try to think about how to and to try to be as responsive as possible. But thank you for the questions. But as you look at those tensions and as you think about the missing piece, and so I'm sorry, Beth, you talked about two pieces of information that could maybe help get you through this. And so one was sort of like, what's in terms of being able to answer some of the boundary questions or being able to answer some of the program questions, there is some essential information around if we build it, will they come, right? Like, and so what would that look like? So I wanted to ask folks to take a moment to think about, try to get into Beth's sort of thing, and to think about, as you think about those themes, and you know, we're going to continue to ask you to look at these scenarios and try to get to this. What's a piece of information or data that can help you sort of move even one step closer to being able to continue to be thought partnering? Or is there, and I would say, is there a piece of information that maybe has been provided that maybe you need distilled differently or presented differently, or simplified, or you want it to show more complexity? And then I think the other the other thing that I'm really interested in is where can there be more analysis, right? So we're giving you tons and tons of data, but I think what a common thing that we've heard is sort of like, give us a little bit more analysis. And I think I'm also hearing, give us a little more interest, give us a little more peek into what we know people think about that analysis, right? So it's almost, so I want to encourage you to think about this. And then I think the third question I wanted to ask you all is, so as you think about those tensions, what's your approach? How are you sort of grappling with that as you think about your own student, your own classroom, your own school, your neighborhood? What's been the way that you reconcile those, and how would you bring that into this space to share with others? So I want to open it up for conversation. You're welcome to enter it into chat or to kind of everyone unmute and kind of have this conversation as we think about these themes.
The more I listen to this, the more frustrated I'm getting. And the reason for that is I feel, I'm very process oriented as an individual. And it seems to me that something like this has to go through a process of discovery, concept, and then actually come up with a plan. And I don't think discovery's been done. To me, I feel like you've got a mixer going, you're getting a group of people together, and you're saying, okay, we're making cookies, what are the ingredients? Without knowing what the ingredients are. And so the information that's lacking are really the goals that you're asking to be achieved. My question is the goal to keep neighborhoods together? And that kind of makes the whole thing that you're saying about DLI programs and trying to keep them in a community very simple, because you're focusing a DLI program in a community where there's those speakers. And I hear other people saying, we like to have neighborhood programs in our school. And to me, that doesn't feel complex. What feels complex to me, and where I don't even understand anymore with a child that's in a DLI program who comes from a family of a native Spanish speaker and a native English speaker, I don't even understand the purpose of DLI programs anymore. So that is now lost upon me. Is a DLI program really a program that is trying to educate people in their native language? Or is a DLI program a program that brings two cultures together and educates each other in learning two different languages? There's so many gaps in all this, and there is certainly a sense of urgency in the way that Franklin's massively overcrowded right now, and it's a brand new school. The district closed a high school at the same time. Balancing Bridger, if that's the priority, maybe it needs to be in baby steps, but it can't, everything in my mind can't be done at once. And I guess my question is, why is the district approaching it with this process and asking all the questions and answers to be arrived at the same time, rather than working through it sequentially?
Yeah, Andrew, I'm not sure if you joined the coalition a little bit later, and if you were present for Michael Bacon's presentation on the purpose of DLI programs and outcomes. But so I'm a Harrison Park parent, and there are some things I wanted to share with the whole group about our community. So Michael Bacon directs the DLI programs for the district. So the primary purpose of DLI programs is to improve academic outcomes and the school experience for native speakers, right? That's what we've heard. I just want to share. That
was not the case 5 years ago. So it's changed, just so you know.
Well, so I mean, there's certainly, so I wanted to share with the whole group, because I don't think this has been said before in the whole group, that at a school like Harrison Park, I think part of the thought process with introducing a DLI program was because this is a very diverse school with kids from lots of different backgrounds. Not even though there is a Chinese population is focused in that part of town, there are actually kids from, students of color from a lot of different backgrounds who are participating in the DLI program and who will have an academic benefit from participating, even though they're not native Chinese speakers. So that's actually that's a big component of the DLI program at Harrison Park. Is there are kids who speak Somali at home, Spanish at home, Vietnamese at home, who are in the Chinese DLI program. And so I wanted to respond also to the comments that input from Woodstock or Bridger families hasn't been heard, because those are the two schools I just am throwing out there that are being like hugely impacted by all these proposals. You would agree with that, right? So I saw a lot of comments reviewing the document that like composed all that included all of the comments, not just the slides that we were shown tonight, but the whole comprehensive document. I saw a lot there, and I just want to share that from feedback I've gotten from Harrison Park parents has been that some families feel like they don't feel like an incentive to participate because they think that parents from wealthier schools will actually end up sort of getting at reaching their goals, will end up getting their goals, and that our families won't actually like be heard in the end. So I just want to let everyone hear that.
I also want to add, with the first proposal, I'm the principal at Creative Science. Just to be honest, like I understand for the DLI, if the numbers would be at 520, we currently have 468 students at the school, and we are full, like really full. And I don't know where that extra space would come from, unless you get rid of the library, get rid of the computer lab. I mean, when we look at utilization, yes, it's not 100 or even in the 90s, but there's not extra space in the building. And so I understand looking at the number piece for moving kids in, but also just functioning as a building, you're going to have multiple lunches. Like we have 3 lunches right now, so you'd have to have 4. And again, getting rid of some of the classrooms for the programs. We have 4 speech or SPED teachers in 1 room. If you add more classrooms, you're going to have less rooms for other resources that would need to be there for kids. So I just think that is something that if you're just looking at the data, you wouldn't know unless you've been in that building. So I just wanted to share that. And then my other question is and I feel like it's come up in the chat, do families in DLI programs all want to be in one location? Or they feel, how do they feel around the community that they're in? Are we asking those questions? And then for families, or say like my school, if CSS was moved or dispersed, or if the DLI programs would move, who would remain in those programs? Because even though we said, okay, well, everyone will go back to their neighborhood school for, like, if CSS was dissolved, I don't know if they would all go to their neighborhood school. They still might seek out other programs. So those are just some things I've been thinking about. And again, just around the facility usage, I wanted to make sure people understand that as well.
One thing I wanted to add is when we're talking about being close to the families, people live everywhere. Like not all Chinese people live in the same neighborhood. So we do understand and accept the fact that some of us will have to travel to a certain point, but not too far, right? So I feel there's a need for more schools. I mean, I'm not talking about everywhere, but at least right now we have 2 programs in Southeast. I feel it serves people from, live in different neighborhoods. I think that's very necessary. I do not really understand why we have to combine them together just for the sake of, limiting co-location, which itself is not really a bad thing. For example, I mean, Woodstock and it's a very balanced program, and it's really robust, successful. And a lot of Chinese people wanted to go there, send the kids there, because it's a successful program. And it's not just Chinese people there. And there's a lot of years of work in history, community building to get to this point. So it's not just simply, hey, let's move it to another location and we can expect it to be successful. I mean, on the other hand, I do feel there's a need to, improve or expanded the program in Harrison Park because it's towards a single strand, it's really challenging. So what can we do really to help the Harrison Park DLI program without basically changing up the whole thing? Everyone's gonna have to go through all this. And I'm worried about this program itself, you know, and also have we asked all the Chinese families, where do they really want the program to be? Because I've talked to a lot of Woodstock Chinese families who live around Harrison Park, and they choose to goes to Woodstock because it's a great program there. So I wonder when there's an assumption made up, and what's the data behind that? Did we have a survey? That's what the family wants, or it feels like it's reasonable to have the program in the neighborhood, but then which neighborhood? So anyway, that is just my 2 cents there. Thank you.
Can I ask a question about these themes?
Oh, sure.
Are we going to is this the opportunity right now to discuss this, or is there small groups coming up? Because I don't.
To discuss the themes or
these questions.
Yeah. This is the time.
This is the time. Okay. So, well, because I just think that, okay, thank you for answering that question. So here is the additional information and data that I think as the principal at Atkinson and the former principal of Rigler in Northeast, and having been a dual immersion teacher for 11 years, I think that we need more information from our native speakers in the community. I think that we need to know I need to know how the surveying is happening with the phone calls and what questions are being asked, and if those are being conducted. And I think Shani said they're being conducted in multiple languages. I would imagine so. Some way to collect quantitative data as well as qualitative data, so that there is a transparency with this coalition, or an anonymous way to share all of the feedback and surveys, not a few quotes that are chosen, because then I have questions about how those quotes were chosen and why. I also think that more information about dual language is needed. If we are at this point in the process and there are still questions about the priority of dual language, about what are the issues with co-location, why are we talking about prioritizing school-wide immersion? I think that information on teacher recruitment, retention, and teachers' experience in dual language programs district-wide needs to be addressed, because if we are talking about prioritizing school-wide immersion and why, and it has to do with partially, teachers' ability to collaborate and provide high quality, rigorous instruction to students because they are working in teams instead of in isolation, because we know that the research shows that that's best practice, then how do we get that information or seek out that feedback from teachers across the district in other programs? My community has not had a voice in this yet, and except for our representatives here in the coalition who have done an amazing job. But I'm concerned specifically about the voice of our native speakers. My experience in dual language and working with native speakers for years is that this sending emails, the email voices that are being heard right now are people who are accessing technology, who have privilege, who have power, who have voice, who have been empowered in this system. we have not yet heard from the community in which this system was built to oppress. And until we have those voices and we can really share and really have a common understanding, I guess, for the priorities of dual language. And that's just my bias, because that's kind of what I've focused on. I realize there's also the efficient use of buildings and the neighborhood piece, but it really does feel like there's two different things happening here. And we won't know about how to use the facilities in an effective way until we have made some decisions about where programs are going to be located. Because our DLI programs do pull from families in a region rather than a neighborhood. There's probably more information or analysis needed, but that's what's coming up for me right now. Thanks for allowing for this conversation.
Other folks? Lisa?
Hi there. I have been trying to get a hold of a map, and I don't know who to go to. I met with Megan today, and I think I'm asking, I don't know the right words to use. So, so on our existing boundaries map, I would like a map of this, but I don't want the colors and I don't want the current lines. I would like this, you know, like this is, I just picked, this is the existing map y'all gave us, which is great, which is super helpful. I refer to it all the time, but I don't want the colors and all the lines on it. Who can I get that from? So I just want to I just want the schools. I want the regular streets, and you can give me this like outer line, but I don't want anything else. I want where the schools are and nothing else. Who can I get that from? Because though last week we used the program, I got to use it very briefly to try to like move the lines around and see, which was awesome, but I don't have time to learn a program. I work full time. I'm a mom. I'm barely hanging on. Y'all know how it is right now. We all are in the same boat. So I want to be able to like do something in pencil. I have my vision, but I don't know how to help it. For the conversations about the DLI and all of that, I'm hearing it and I'm struggling with it. But for me, what I see, what I can do to contribute here is to draw. And that's what I'm good at. And putting things on pencil to paper helps me think and process. I guess I keep hearing our main goal is to, first and foremost, is to get Kellogg is opening in August. And as I understand it, there's no question about that. Kellogg has to open in August. So that's our goal. So I'm kind of leaving the conversation to DLI, which is way over my head, frankly, to y'all. But if somebody could get me a map, I'll hug you from afar. Thank you.
We can absolutely get you the map. I'm not sure which small group you're in, but there might be a way to even to just show you what that map looks like in your small group, so you can have some interim relief there. Really appreciate your comment.
I'm in Duke, and yeah, and that's been great. So that'd be awesome. But I'm more than happy to pick it up from somewhere. I will drive. I will even cross the river.
We're gonna try to make it very easy for you. Thank you for that. We're gonna try. We'll see how we do.
Thank you so much.
No problem. So I guess one so to go back to some of the conversation here, I think that I really appreciate everyone sort of adding to the chat, folks who are sharing with the whole group. We do want to kind of we heard feedback about wanting to have more of this like group discussion. And I guess, one of the things I want to just sort of hold some space for is before we go into the small groups, I do want to sort of talk about kind of where you have some agency, right? So in terms of, the maps and the scenarios, in your groups, you have absolute agency to kind of to be as critical over those scenarios as possible, to start from your own sort of whatever place you'd like to start from, and to reimagine what those could look like. They really are a sort of starting place to try to bring some synthesis into the many sort of things that we heard. So, and, I going back to Lisa, the ability to draw and reimagine boundaries is something that we're going to be asking you to think through. But I guess before we go into the small groups, I just wanted to hold space for a little bit in terms of, we've surfaced quite a bit of need for information, sort of wanting some more analysis and wanting some more perspective. And I'm wondering, I heard a little bit about how Lisa's going to kind of reconcile, and that she's going to focus in on boundaries. And I've heard other folks sort of, lean into, kind of what and sort of how to sort of contribute from there. But I'm wondering if anyone else wants to bring up sort of how you personally are going to approach reconciling the different tensions, and sort of put this in the space as we consider going into these small groups.
I have one question. So I know our goal is really to decide on the boundary for catalog, but how exactly so is there any room for change later? For example, okay, we identify some schools gonna go there, and understand right now to draw all the boundaries. I don't know if we can achieve that without, there are a lot of conversations need to happen, but at least can we okay, these are schools, and later we have more conversation about exact boundaries for those schools. And then that's gonna lead to really who's gonna go into catalog, who's not. Maybe have some room, even later we need another school to join in, instead of right now decided about everything, because that is really, really challenging to us. I am just at loss by seeing all the comments and everything.
Totally. Well, so I think we're going to be able to simulate that very soon. So I think the first opportunity to be able to kind of throw something out there, hear from some reaction in the open house, and then kind of quickly come back and then sort of think about how to reconcile that. So I'm hoping that folks see the open house really as that sort of first chance to simulate that. And I think that we'll have a lot of learnings as we see sort of the collective's reaction, as well as sort of what happens when we take it outside of the committee. And we can, I know that Shanice is listening, and we've had lots of conversations about sort of and then how do we then sort of think as creatively as possible about how to reach folks, despite technology challenges, language challenges, how do we really sort of try to get some of that perspective that I'm hearing that people really want? It's kind of like that, I call it's that grocery store accountability. How do you go to the grocery store, look your neighbor in the eye, and sort of, sort of this is the best I did with the decision, and sort of hear their feedback. So I think we want to try to simulate that. So that will be that sort of iteration, call it iteration, call it trial and error. I think we're about to get there. All right.
Well, can I just ask a clarifying question?
Of course.
So are we going through the 1A, the new scenarios that were sent out, and then discussing those, or are we taking it a different direction?
So I think what's going to happen next is in our agenda, we're going to kind of go through the feedback that we heard about those scenarios, talk about sort of how we arrived at the scenarios tonight, allow for some more discussion, kind of continue to massage and try to get them not perfect, right? We're not there yet. We still need more information, but closer, and really try to capture sort of like how this group is moving into some closer place of a bigger agreement. So
and that will include some rationale about like why this is what's being presented to us as opposed to something else, and like where the decision-making process in these scenarios.
Yeah, and I think we really endeavor to be as transparent about the decision making, and I think we're trying to let you know sort of where this is coming from. But I think we're always open to feedback about like where you need more explanation here, less explanation there. I'll be looking to make sure that we're really trying to hit that. So why don't I turn it over to Jed so we can get into some of that? Unless did someone else have? Did someone else have a question?
I just quickly was wondering, and this is just for maybe the future, whether we could tie the small groups to a GIS person who could actually implement the changes that are being discussed in real time on a map, because I'm assuming the maps are tied to data. So it could be more real than just moving a line along. You could actually see population move with it, and someone that actually understands the application, how to use it.
It's like you were in my group, because you know that I don't have the GIS skill. Jacob, don't, Josh, don't make fun of me. So the intent was that there are some elements of the map that us lay people can be able to change. So maybe if you wouldn't mind, sort of giving us some more places of where you'd like additional layers than what are already there, we can absolutely do that, and we can see if we can get.
The layers are great, and it's beautiful. It really is wonderful. But what I'm talking about is a real interactive experience where a group has time, and maybe not even during this, to redraw boundaries, understand what the consequences of those boundaries are, how it truly impacts applications, so it can be a little bit more precise and deliberate than, wouldn't this be fun, but really, does it work? That's
right. Yeah. I think you bring up a really good point, and I think one of the reasons why we want to kind of extend the timeline is to I think what we're hearing more is that like the decisions have implications and consequences, and how do we sort of getting to the decisions shouldn't be the only goal, but really sort of talking and getting collective understanding and analysis about the impact of those decisions is really important too. So let's see how far we get tonight, and let's keep endeavoring to try to keep getting there. I think I'm going to turn it over to Jed now. Any other questions? All right. Oh no, I'm not going to turn it over to Jed. We're going to do a poll. Sorry about that. This is again, this is why you probably were thinking about my use of those maps. So one of the things that we wanted to try to do as we talk through is to also collect some real-time information from each of you. And so we wanted to ask you 3 questions, and this is going to definitely help us try to get you better information, and also try to continue to recalibrate. And so Jed, the magical Jed, is going to show us how to use the poll on Zoom. But basically, we're going to have 3 questions. The first question is, when considering immersion programs, how important is it to choose program locations that are close to concentrations of native speaking students? So we're trying to get some deeper conversation about that. So I believe on your Jed, you're going to have to just tell us how to do that. You're going to have to pop in and
yeah, I'm here. I'm ready to help. So
okay.
I'm going to launch this poll, and actually all 3 of these questions are going to come up at once. So did you want to read through the rest of them, Danny?
Sure, I'll read through them. The second question, when drawing boundary lines and feeder patterns, how important is it for student demographics to be as similar as possible across schools? So, and then the third question is, as the coalition approaches this work, how important is it to make a recommendation for the Kellogg Middle School attendance area, even if the outcome goals are not addressed for the entire Southeast area quite yet? And that would be until phase 2.
Can I ask a question about question 2?
Of course.
How important is it for student demographics? I mean, you're talking about like race, language, all of that, like the whole,
Yeah, so
like
race,
the whole big thing,
gender,
the big
yeah.
picture. Great, thank you so much.
No problem, thank you.
And there's no opportunity to provide narrative, like it's just pop a bubble. Like for example, for me, it might be, I might have different priorities for elementary school than for middle and high school in terms of demographics.
What I would say is go ahead and enter the narrative in the chat, and we'll add that to the information.
Okay.
Hey, Danny, can you share how this poll is going to be used?
Sure. So I think what we want to use the poll for is just to get a sort of a temperature check. Now that we've talked about those themes, now that we've kind of surfaced some of those tensions, I think we're assigning this a moment in time, an impression of the group in a moment in time. I don't think that we're going to, I don't think given the conversation that we've had and given sort of like the needs for more information, that we're assuming that this is locked in. It really is sort of an impression of a moment in time, sort of where the coalition is and how that might inform some of our meeting and some of the work moving forward. Thank you for asking that question. We will not sell this data.
I'm confused because like that first question, that seems like the sort of question that we want to be posing to the communities that are impacted by the native language programs. I do not feel that I can speak to them. Personally, I'd like those programs in my community, but that's not, you know, I'm being asked to answer a question for people whose input we don't seem to fully have yet. And that feels uncomfortable.
Okay. Well, so you can skip that question if you don't want to answer it.
So we are having responses come in. We've got 19 so far. That's of the 64 folks that are here. Of course, we've got a number of district staff. So I think we probably want to see that get up into the 40s.
Danny, could you clarify what the third question is asking? I'm confused by what it's asking.
Sure. So so one of the constraints of our work is the timeline for Kellogg Middle School reopening, right? And so when we think about our outcome goals of trying to balance enrollment to make sure that we're doing good building utilization, that we're offering equitable programming, how important is it to make a recommendation for Kellogg, even if we're not ready to sort of achieve those outcomes, those larger outcomes, until phase 2? So the district has said this is important. This is a timeline. This is a constraint. How important is it to you as a coalition member? Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Danny, I can't submit the poll if I don't check a box.
Jed, do you have a suggestion?
Yeah, I think unfortunately it is an all or nothing poll, and that's just a limitation of Zoom.
We could always put a question of can't answer and then, or uncomfortable answering in the future. I'm good.
Yeah, that's a great suggestion, is to add like a NA. That's great.
And you could also, of course, just add in to the chat if you would like to give us the answers for the ones that you are comfortable answering. And we can take that privately to like just me or someone else. So it looks like we've stalled out at about 40. Were there any other folks that wanted to get an answer in? You can either chat or just speak up. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and end the polling now, and I'll be able to share those results. So you should be seeing the results there, and we're going to go ahead and capture this as well.
Danny, you're on. Still on mute, I think.
Oh gosh, this night. So I'll just go through really quickly and talk about the results. So for number one, this was the question about the importance of program locations that are close to concentrations of native speakers. And so by the majority of folks at over 90, just at 90% said that this is either very important or fairly important, with fairly important being the most. And then 10% said it was slightly important, and we had no one who said that it was not at all important. When you go to question two, we have much more even answers. We don't necessarily have that clear of a front runner, although fairly important emerges as the number one category in 34%. So we think about sort of balancing student demographics across all schools. 34% of the group said it was fairly important. 20% said very important. 29% slightly important, and 17% said not at all important. And then number three, as the coalition approaches this work, how important is a recommendation for Kellogg? And even if we're not able to achieve outcomes until phase 2. And 22% said this was very important, 39% said fairly important, 32 said slightly important, and 7% said not at all important. All right, I'm gonna turn it over to Jed to talk about the scenarios, but now that you have that sort of in your mind, you get a sense of where folks are. And I would say that I have questions, right? Of course, we're gonna wanna kind of unpack this a lot, and you'll be able to do this in your small group, but it really is a moment in time sort of where folks are.
Okay, thank you very much, Danny. So I've seen a lot of questions about how we got to the place of the 3 scenarios tonight. And I wanted to just take a little time to talk through that and give you some understanding. I will say that at the end of the last meeting, we had anticipated running through some polls that we decided not to as we were sort of formulating how to move forward here. So ultimately, we did decide to use the information that we heard in the main room breakout report outs, as well as information that we could glean from from the notes that were taken by your facilitators and note takers. So the intent here is really to show you, 3 of these scenarios that were based on group work. And again, like I said, captured on the worksheets in the main room report outs. I think that going forward, really the third bullet here, I think is the important one, that we really want to limit interpretation by flow analytics. And I heard some suggestions here tonight about what would be helpful as far as tools to help us get there. We're working through a challenging virtual environment here, and I recognize that. So we need to be flexible in ways to make sure that you can provide us this information that is specific and actionable and allows us to, again, take our interpretation out of this and represent what you discuss and agree to in your work groups. So we're at about 8 o'clock right now. I did want to just give you, I think, one example of how we did this with 1A. I do think that we need to have a discussion with the advisory team as to how to move forward with scenarios and continue to get that information. I'd be really interested to hear what comes out of the work groups along these lines as to what would best enable you to be able to, again, kind of limit the interpretation and best represent your group's work on this. So just to walk through scenario 1A here, this is an example of what we heard from both Team Flavel and Hawthorne was along the lines of combining elements of scenario 1 and scenario 2. So the really prime element of scenario 1 was the all Spanish DLI located at Lent. And then the piece for scenario 2 was all Chinese DLI located at Creative Science, or the Clark building there. There was also by Team Flavel a really specific demonstration of a change to Atkinson's boundary that we were able to move forward as well as part of this. So this is laid out somewhat similar to the explanations that you see in the cover sheet for the scenarios, explaining what that change is from, in this case, scenario 1. And then I wanted to just point out the Team Flavel did find a way to give a really specific boundary suggestion here. And I just want to acknowledge that this is, maybe not working for every work group. And again, it's a conversation that we need to continue to figure out how to enable you to be able to provide these really specific recommendations like the one that you see here. So this just makes it much easier for our group to actually, put a very specific change to this map here and represent the wishes of, in this case, Team Flavel putting this forward. This is what it looks like on the map that the web map that you've seen there. The assumption here is around maintaining a feeder program or a feeder pattern rather. So a change to the Atkinson boundary here also percolated upward to a change in the boundary for Mount Tabor, an expansion of that boundary, as well as Franklin High School. And I did want to spend a little bit more time tonight with the scenarios, focusing in on some of the socioeconomic indicators. I heard that loud and clear from the last meeting that it really seemed too focused in on utilization. I do want to just, acknowledge that I heard a lot here tonight that I think are questions just about, and I think we saw it in the polls too, just about direction overall. So I think that this is just an example of how we can reflect that sentiment going forward. But I want to acknowledge that it appears that, that will probably change as far as the information that you want to see going forward to help. But this is an example here of looking at free and reduced lunch for this particular scenario relative to existing conditions. So really trying to highlight, what were the schools that saw the biggest change in percentage. And so you see that Bridger and Marysville both saw that percentage go up. And I want to give some of the reasoning around that, because as you've heard folks mention, there are many moving parts here with boundaries and both programs moving. So I just wanted to illuminate that in the case of Bridger here, the reason for that was really the transfer of Atkinson's DLI program, which again, there are assumptions that we've talked about and we've heard concerns about tonight, which are how many of those kids those students will actually move to Lent to continue on with that program. That's a question of student and family choice that I think we just, as a collective, need to use our best wisdom to factor in as we go forward. With Marysville here, we see, that free and reduced lunch figure goes up, and that's primarily because of taking on the Lent neighborhood. Remember that Lent in this scenario is a non-attendance area school serving only Spanish DLI. So the demographics of that neighborhood feed into the change of that factor for Marysville. And then you see for Harrison Park, it converts to a 6-8, which is the primary driver here for a reduction in that free and reduced lunch number. And then with Lent, receiving Spanish DLI programs from Bridger and Atkinson and losing its neighborhood is kind of the flip side of I've talked about with these others. And I have also heard quite a bit, just how we might frame or think about this free and reduced lunch disparity between the middle schools. So I also have highlighted that for each of the scenarios here. And then finally, and again, these are all on the slides. I think I'm going to check back with our facilitators as to how we want to move forward with the rest of the meeting here. But I've made some notes here about just some of the, and these are not necessarily pros or cons, they're observations in terms of what we've been thinking about as we've moved through the process so far. That we've talked about that there is value potentially in having these DLI programs near the native speaker households. I want to point that out. We have talked about utilization in terms of modulars, that in this case, the scenario Sunnyside would certainly still need theirs. Bridger and Lent, they may as well, as they're in the 90% range of utilization without them. High school growth is partially accommodated. We still see that Franklin, although this is mitigated a little, is still over 100% by the year 2024. We see that Harrison Park as a middle school has very low enrollment in this scenario. We see that Woodstock and Atkinson, with the movement of their DLI programs, show very low enrollment, although that could rebound based on if we see more folks opting into the neighborhood program with the movement of those programs. And Marysville here having much higher enrollment than the other K5s. That's something that I heard folks point out quite a bit. And then also, of course, no location determined for creative science, which is a big question mark in this scenario where it was really clear that you couldn't have all those students from a Chinese DLI consolidated program under the same roof as creative science. So that's how these have been framed. Again, I think there are just larger questions now about how to, I think, move these forward, how to gain consensus, how to give you better direction on capturing that information so that we're reflecting what your groups agree to moving forward here. So should I go back to Danny or Esther? Just as a time check, we're at about 8:07 here.
Yeah, I don't think we're going to have time for the small breakouts. So what might be helpful is, since we're in the large group and we can maybe do some more discussion about the scenarios, and maybe we can ask participants to see if there's more sort of specific questions on each of the scenarios, and try to get some conversation flowing in that direction. I think we just wouldn't be able to do the small group timed justice. I think we should probably just focus in on the large group. So maybe just to kind of help the group move through, maybe we can focus on sort of see if there's questions about each of the scenarios. I'm seeing some nods, head in agreement that would be too tough to go to small groups. We have about 10 minutes before we kind of close and talk about next steps. So maybe if we just focus on sort of scenario 1A, and see if there's comments, questions, reactions in terms of 1A.
I have a question that I've heard quite a few times from both parents of older kids and parents of younger kids about transportation. And I would really like to know what the transportation plans are, because that impacts my thoughts a lot about, like, say, the Lent neighborhood kids having to go to Marysville. How are they getting there?
Yeah, I know that she's been having a hard time with connectivity, but Claire, could you speak to sort of transportation and sort of how we plan to bring that information?
So it depends on what, if for instance, we had a neighborhood boundary and also had a DLI school inside of that neighborhood boundary, we could provide transportation to, so it depends on the outcome. And so we can bring a person, we can bring some specifics about how transportation would accommodate changes based on the different kinds of scenarios that are coming forward. So that would probably, we could take a couple of scenarios and just kind of talk through how transportation would work with them, so that people understand when we provide transportation and when we don't. We're happy to bring that to the group.
Great.
Can I ask one clarifying question on that?
Mm-hmm.
I know that for focus option schools, non-DLI focus option schools, transportation is not provided right now. What's true right now with DLI students if they're outside of the neighborhood?
I don't think that's the same in every DLI school. So let me bring back information to the group.
Just to throw it out there, Bridger, transportation is provided for out of neighborhood native speakers to the DLI program.
Atkinson, it is not provided. So if you're out of the neighborhood program, then you have to transport yourself.
Yeah, I believe that we
Japanese.
have transportation from Atkinson to Mount Tabor, but not otherwise.
Richmond does provide transportation, I believe.
Rose City Park provides transportation as well, I believe.
Great. Okay, so we'll come back with both what is currently and then also sort of some link to some proposals. Any other questions or just reactions or comments about scenario 1?
I'm from Team Hawthorne. I don't recall that we really agreed to combining the DOI, because as I remember, we were talking about the downside of, having fewer DOI, put in the same location. And then also the K-8, we're all trying to break it down from K-8 to K-5 or, middle school, but building a K-8, K-8 for Chinese program, I don't understand that. But anyway, I don't think we agreed to that scenario.
Okay, thanks for the clarification there.
I was just going to share from Flavel. Just for context, we just were interested in I think there were 2 scenarios, right, that involved creative science taking some additional enrollment, and we settled on the K-8, I think 2 or whatever one would consolidate it as a K-8, but we were actually more interested in just figuring out. I don't think we had as strong feelings about which one of those to try, as what we were trying to solve for was what we saw as a weakness of the Springboard proposal in leaving Bridger still pretty overcrowded. And so we were just interested in sort of exploring ways you could combine creative science, having some of Bridger's zone, and then that's where the Atkinson piece came from too. We tried to draw a boundary to, again, take a little bit more away from Bridger to see if we could get to the point where they wouldn't need modulars. And I think less importantly, but something that I've heard from a few folks is like, there's that little zone of South Tabor that is now zoned for Harrison Park and Madison, but even though it's kind of within walking distance of Franklin and Kellogg. So we figured that's sort of 2 birds with 1 stone, right? You take a little bit out of the Bridger zone and then have that neighborhood sort of feel like it's zoned more for its neighborhood middle school and high school. So for what it's worth, that's the context on it.
Great, thank you.
And I just want to, I know I said it earlier, but as the principal of CSS, 520 children will not, if it sticks as a K-8 or what the proposal will not fit in Clark. It will not work from an actual functioning capacity. Just to be clear.
We understood that it wasn't going to work in a practical. I think for us, it was just the idea that it's it's who you're displacing, where the population is displaced, and with an equity lens, we weren't looking at it practically from capacity. We're looking at it as do we feel that students are entitled to space in the location that is convenient for them in their neighborhood over focus programs. So we were looking at lengths in all of the programs with that lens.
That's great.
I wanted to, just wanted to chime in really quickly from Woodstock perspective. I try to be quiet and do more listening at these meetings, but one thing I'm definitely hearing in Min's voice is just that that urgency and that sense of concern. And I think one of the reasons it's a tough discussion for us is because it's come on really quick. At the start of this process, Woodstock was in phase 2, and then there was a quick shift where we became into phase 1. And I think the other thing is it's like all these schools, it's such a huge piece for us. And coming back to how I really want to try to listen, we just had our first conversation as a staff, our true conversation as a staff at our staff meeting this week. And we did our own little internal survey, and I haven't even had a chance to share those survey results with our own staff. And Min's been doing her work, talking with families, which I really appreciate. And That's the other thing. I mean, how this has moved so quickly. We have one scheduled, but I'm like, man, this is just happening so quick. We haven't had a real opportunity to hear the parent voice. So I don't want to come across as being afraid of change. I think change can be good. I think change can help us address a lot of these concerns that have come up at the first part of our meeting. But I do want to make sure that if I'm doing my job, I want to represent our parents and our families, and I want to represent our staff and what they're saying and believing. So Amin, I appreciate your passion for what you're sharing with us, and I want to continue to do my part to support that. So anyway, I just wanted to chime in kind of where Woodstock's at, because it seems to be a big piece in this discussion right now.
I really appreciate that. Oh, sorry, someone else?
No, it's fine. I wanted to make sure to jump in, just because listening to both Seth and Min tonight, I think a lot of what they've said for me really echoes a lot of the conversations we're having at Atkinson. And, the biggest piece there, Seth, is what you just said about it just feels like it's moving so fast that I don't feel like we're having time to really have the conversations we need to be having, with our families, especially during COVID when everybody's stretched so thin. And then also really my daughter's teacher right now has been teaching at Atkinson for over 20 years. So she was one of the first DLI teachers, when that program started. So her input to me is some of the most valuable input we could have. So it's I want to make sure that, especially because we went from a week or so ago, Atkinson kind of staying as is, to now Atkinson being in the vast majority of this and having a pretty huge change on our school community. And so I really want to make sure that we have time to have those conversations before any decisions are made.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
Well, and Sheila, I'd like to add to that. I'm from Marysville, and we don't have community input. That's why the representatives from Marysville are here. But as far as including Lent in our community, the communities need to speak together. Because when I first read that, I was excited. I respect the Lent family community, and I would love to see what positive change could affect a neighborhood school. I feel neighborhood only schools are so left out of this conversation, because DLIs are so important, because the people who have choice to go to DLIs or focus options have the loudest voices. And so I really think this group should be about coming together. And if we could get parents and even community outside of this coalition talking together about the positives of these future changes, instead of just complaining about, we're scared of change, this is wrong, there's a lot of history to it, but also this is all about working together. We're all trying to do the best for our children. And it just feels a lot of infighting, more so to me, and it's really disheartening to see.
Hi there.
Go ahead. Well, go ahead, Lisa. Go ahead.
Hi there. So going back to scenario 1A, I am totally against middle schools that have, or schools that are K-8. It has been through my experience of watching children, just while I am now a parent of a school-age child. Oh my God, middle schoolers are a whole different beast than a kindergartner. So the idea of leaving creative science as a K-8, I'm not for any school. I think they should all go. I don't know whether it's an option or a thought process to go 7th and 8th grade, or 6th, 7th, and 8th. Or is it does it have to be 6th, 7th, and 8th for some reason that Portland does that? I don't know. But it's just that's one reason why I'm not a fan of 1A, is because of the keeping creative science at K-8. Thank you.
I would like to say, as a parent at Atkinson, I'm super against scenario 1. And scenario 1 is focusing on moving Atkinson to Lentz. One, it feels like we're in the Latinx community is being pushed out. And 2, I get very concerned about the neighborhood program that's left at Atkinson. So I want to make sure that a lot of people understand that just because we're talking about DLI, we're not taking into consideration neighborhood programs, okay? That neighborhood program at Atkinson is struggling with retention, okay? Is struggling to keep students in that neighborhood program. And what we're finding is that students that end up in the neighborhood programs are students that did not get into the Spanish DLI program. and they're still trying to get that Spanish content or conversation within those programs. So I would really love to do something that benefits both DLI, knowing that there is more request from parents to invest in DLI programming, as well as making sure that we address the reality of gentrification, knowing that neighborhood programs are struggling with retention of students. And when those programs, when we're saying we're pushing a program out somewhere else, it means that the neighborhood programs will not be as rich, will not be as strong, and will not be as populated, okay, by other students, and will be more singularly minded rather than globally minded.
I'd like to add on to that comment. I'm the principal of Vestal, which is a little tiny neighborhood school, and it's tiny for some of these reasons that have been brought up. And I know I've said this before, and I will continue to say it, that it feels like a real philosophical chasm that we've created in PPS. And I'm not even sure, I mean, as the principal of Vestal, I'm completely for advocating for Vestal. But when I look at the larger district, I'm so torn. And I know, Danny, you had asked, like, how are you reconciling your tension? And I'm not at all reconciling any tension right now, because I'm trying to look as an advocate for Vestal, which is an awesome neighborhood school that is full of diversity that's not represented in a lot of parts of Portland. And I'm hearing the vast majority of this conversation to be around DLI, which is fine and great, but not what I understood this process to be about in terms of drawing boundaries. And so I feel like I'm really unsettled. There's like, are we drawing boundaries just to use buildings, or are we talking about a philosophy of what's best for kids? And I feel like I need some honest clarity on that in order to know how to advocate. I appreciate everyone's, perspective and see that it's very, very complicated, but I also see that we have to make some decisions and some change, at some point, or else we're going to keep replicating the inequities that we are all living.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. And thanks for responding to that. I really, I think that this scenario is not a scenario where we're able to reconcile, is what I'm hearing. And I think we did the thing where the first one got the most conversation. It may not necessarily be the best scenario for us to kind of focus on, but I do really appreciate the conversation about this first scenario. I think we can pull out a lot of the places where we need to add more perspective and sort of like bring things. I'm also hearing folks really wanting to kind of hang in there, stay in this like discomfort, to try to find, where do we have this place of agreement? What's the change that we're all willing to sort of to be part of in service of students and that sort of student experience. And I think that focus on what's best for students and student learning is what's going to keep us moving together. And we are at 8:25, and so I want to maybe take some license with the agenda. And I think we want to kind of move into some next steps. So we had hoped to kind of go through all the scenarios to get some more feedback, to try to move towards what's the sort of spaghetti on the wall that we throw for the first open house. And I think that we have some more work to do at the district. And I think what we want to try to do moving into the next meeting is really kind of pulling the themes of this conversation. But I think what's really important, what I'm hearing, is that folks are wanting more perspective, and to sort of name what that perspective is, or what the sort of like analysis is behind that perspective, so that folks can start to have more of the conversation and the dialogue around what those tensions might be, and with an eye towards sort of what are some potential solutions to reconcile that. And so I think one tool to do that is to continue to refine scenarios, and to ask folks to kind of to continue to kind of play with, you know, where we can make adjustments, and then hopefully we can also surface some more time to continue to have these conversations. So I'm going to turn it over to Esther and Kent to maybe tell us a little bit more about some next steps, and then and just continue to thank you all for this really rich conversation. I think one of my sort of takeaways is really trying to hear sort of more of the perspective that folks are bringing, in addition to sort of like the specifics around like details of information. So I really appreciate that people were able to bring that into the space. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Danny. Truly appreciate it. I also want to thank our Southeast Guiding Coalition members tonight for the conversations. The conversations have been very insightful. They've been enriching, and they've been very passionate. We could feel your pulse in all the things that you talked about today and all the ideas that came forth. That said, we will take your train of thought, we'll take your ideas, we'll take your input. We'll go back to the drawing table and we will prepare something for our meeting next week. I just again want to recognize your commitment to the process, and I want to truly appreciate your passion and the knowledge base that you bring to the process. In closing tonight, and on behalf of the district leadership, I want to thank our members for their participation. I also do want you to please remember to complete the feedback form. A lot of the questions that you raised tonight and a lot of the ideas that you came up with tonight would be better served if we have them on feedback forms so that we can revisit them and we can use them to create the information for the upcoming meeting. We do take your feedback seriously. Your feedback does guide our process. I know that part of what I heard tonight is that some people do not see their responses or their questions reflected in the feedback. But I can assure you that every single feedback and input that's given to us is taken into consideration as we plan our upcoming meetings. We will continue to do our best again to honor your desires, even as we center students and honor our racial equity and social justice initiatives district-wide. We'll also make sure that as much as possible, we provide more clarity going forward. One of the other things I heard tonight is that people weren't sure if we are focusing on a DLI theme or if we're focusing on Kellogg. We will definitely make our information a lot clearer going forward. Again, thank you so much for your participation. Thank you, Danny and the Flow Analytics team. Kent, do you have anything to add?
I would just add that I do appreciate the conversation. I think every time that we get together, Flow and certainly the district learn something about how we can provide information to help you as coalition members feel as though you're representing the communities that you are from in the best way possible. And so our commitment is certainly to working to provide you with that information, whether it be through scenarios or through district information. And so just appreciate your time tonight, and we look forward to continue working with you.
Well, stay well, travel safe, and we will see you on the 22nd of October. Have a great night.